All right, Nick, let's talk about the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Unbelievable season so far for the Fighting Irish. Notre Dame has looked really, really strong. Had a really, really good 2025 signing day here, but you got to keep looking to the future. You can never stop recruiting, and Notre Dame has not. Some really great news for the Fighting Irish about this 2026 class. But before we get into that, I'm Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, Nick, as I alluded to, the Notre Dame Irish made a really nice move, potential move. It hasn't quite happened yet, but I do believe it is going to happen for this 2026 class. Let's get into the article and we can talk more about it on the other side. This is from Slap the Sign. It says the Notre Dame football team just finished up a successful signing day but recruiting never sleeps. The Fighting Irish are now setting their sights on the 2026 class as the commitment list continues to grow. It appears that it will grow by one more just ahead of Christmas. One of the top offensive line prospects in the 2026 class, Ben Nichols, announced on Friday morning he has a date in mind for his commitment. The four-star offensive tackle out of Michigan says he's pulling the trigger on Christmas Eve. Nichols boasts offers from most of the best teams in the country, including Alabama, Florida State, Illinois, and Indiana, among several others. However, it looked like the Irish are the team to beat. On3 has given the Irish an 83% chance of landing the offensive lineman. Michigan State is technically in second place, though they just have a 6% chance of overcoming Notre Dame. I think this is really great news for the Irish. Building in the trenches, always really good. You love to see a team that never stops recruiting. I'm curious what your thoughts on this one are, Nick. But before we get to you, Irish fans, pause in the season. Everything is on hold until we get to the next few weeks of big time football where it really starts to matter. I want to know, though, while we have a little bit of a break, look back on this season and tell us in the comment section below who has been your MVP of this team this season. I think there's a lot of great players, a lot of good stuff going on both sides of the ball, but let us know, who do you think has been the most impressive? Who is your MVP for the season in the comment section below? But nonetheless, Nick, what do you think about this news for the Irish?
So it's interesting, right? Obviously, Notre Dame being an independent, they didn't have a game to play this conference championship weekend, but Notre Dame is flying under the radar as a national title contender, as a college football playoff participant. They're one of the best teams in football. We all know this. They've beaten the brakes off of pretty much everybody since their just ugly defeat earlier this season against the University of Northern Illinois. A lot of credit has to be given to Coach Freeman, his staff, and of course the players for doing an incredible job bouncing back, but they're sliding under the radar. And Coach Freeman, as a recruiter for the long term success of Notre Dame, is also sliding under the radar. It's very interesting. You look at a lot of these other huge blue blood programs from Michigan, Ohio State, Texas, Alabama, Georgia, USC, Oregon, whatever. They have massive NIL deals, massive collectives, tens of millions of dollars seem flowing out of the word work everywhere. Notre Dame, I'm sure, has some very good network for that, but I don't see it in the reporting nearly as much in terms of the numbers. They actually kind of rank more like a mid-tier Big Ten school in terms of NIL dollars allocated and collective funding and things like that. So Coach Freeman and his staff on a recruiting perspective aren't, or at least don't have the same amount of funding from outside sources the way other blue bloods do, and they're still consistently year in and year out doing a great job on the recruiting front. Here's something that's very interesting. If you go back to 2022, this is the last handful of recruiting classes. So in 2022, according to 24/7 Sports, Notre Dame had the seventh best recruiting class. In 2023, they had the 12th. In 2024, they had the ninth. In 2025, they have the 12th. And in 2020 or in 2025, obviously, depending how it shakes out, they have the 12th currently. And in 2026, they're currently projected to have the 11th. Now, what does this mean? It means Notre Dame consistently, year in and year out, is a top 12 recruiting team. What's very interesting about that, in my opinion, is that the college football playoff is the top 12 teams. This is a deliberate strategy. Now, look, I'm not saying Notre Dame is just trying to get to the number 12 recruiting class and that's it, but they are focused on consistently building a top 8, top 10, top 12 roster year in and year out, right? They're not spending resources chasing nothing but the top 5 stars. They're not trying to just get the big money grabs. They're not raising money from NIL collectives. They're putting in the work as a coaching staff, winning big recruit after big recruit. And this latest news is just another example of this. Coach Freeman is so underrated, and his staff, to give credit where credit is due, so underrated as a recruiter. And this is the reason why, regardless of what happens this college football playoff run here, this Notre Dame Fighting Irish team will be a contender for years to come.
Yeah, Nick, and I think you bring up a really interesting point here. You look at this 2025 class, or perspective 2025 class. I think this is the best one to look at this point in time. And you say the number 12 overall class. You talk about consistency and allocation of funds. I think they really do a fantastic job here. You look at this class, no like traditional 5-star recruits on this class, but they have 12 or 13, I think, 4-star recruits. That's a very high number of very talented recruits, throughout this whole class. It's just a bunch. You usually see some of these bigger classes, they have like 2 5-stars maybe. Then they'll have like 6 or 7 4-stars, and then everybody else is like 3 and 2 or 3 and below, as far as that goes. But this is Notre Dame star that really just kind of like cut the top off, didn't go after the big traditional 5-stars, and just instead went really wide and got a ton of really talented 4-star players. I think it's a really interesting strategy, like you said, a strategy that, especially this year, is going to help them go forward into this college football playoff and do a lot of really, really good things. I think even last year, you look at Notre Dame last year, they only had one 5-star, talking about the 2024 class. Then they had, again, probably about 7 or 8 4-stars. They really just load up in that really high, but just not quite the top tier of talent, and go super wide in these recruiting classes. I think this is a really interesting strategy that they have pulled off. And I think another interesting part here is how Notre Dame is placed as a school. They're obviously one of the most historically relevant programs in the country. There's a lot of prestige about Notre Dame, but not being an independent, not playing, by anyone's rules, I think is really interesting for Notre Dame, because as all of this shakes out, as the college football playoff develops, as these new conferences develop, Notre Dame isn't really tied to any one thing. I think they can make the change to be who they want to be at any point in time. If they wanted to go join another conference, another division, they can do that if they wanted to. So I think it's a really interesting place for Notre Dame as a school to be. So I think they're right where they need to be, right in the middle pack, both, as a program and as a recruiting class as well. And I think this is a great strategy, like you brought up, for Notre Dame to keep them relevant for many, many years to come.